Violence against women and girls is
thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This honourable House now resume its sittings. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Daryl Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahuford, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Dr. Chang, present. Mr. Spencer, present. Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting not listening to Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers. Minister Montague.
Check, check.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat that is not my own. Mr. Speaker, as this Honorable House is aware, on April 6, 2018, the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, added amongst others 7 Russian oligarchs and 12 companies they own or control to its designated national list. Mr. Oleg Deripaska, the single largest shareholder in UC Rusal, was named amongst those on the OFAC sanction list. As a result of being named, all assets of Mr. Deripaska and those entities that are within the U.S. jurisdiction have been frozen, and U.S. persons are prohibited from dealing with them. Additionally, non-U.S. persons could face secondary sanctions for knowingly facilitating significant transactions for or on behalf of the individuals or entities sanctioned. In an effort to reduce the effects of the sanctions over the 1,200 workers from Windalco, the livelihood of Jamaican citizens and the local economy, an appeal was made to the U.S. Department of Treasury by Jamaica in June 2018. The government of Jamaica sought the grant of waivers for UC Rusal to 1. Allow the company to purchase fuel, equipment, spares, chemicals, and other supplies needed to sustain the economic operation of the Yuatan plant and the attendant activities. And 2, to permit the company to conduct business transactions with banks in Jamaica, including their intermediaries, to facilitate the continuation of UC Rusal's business. This will allow the banks and their corresponding banking relations to provide vital services that support the function of the plant. These include making payments to workers and suppliers and engaging in new supply contracts that are required to sustain the operations of the company. And 3, permit the company to sell to the government of Jamaica as a last resort. Since then, OFAC has confirmed through our ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Audrey Marks, that Windalco's commercial activities are covered under General License 14. An excerpt from the letter dated July 18, 2018 from OFAC is as follows, and we quote, "To the extent that the relevant activities of Windalco involve transactions that are consistent with the maintenance and winding down activities authorized by General License 14, U.S. persons may continue to engage in those transactions with Windalco until the expiration of GL 14. Similarly, transactions with Windalco by non-U.S. persons will not be considered significant for the purposes of a sanction determination." End of quote. The full letter, Mr. Speaker, is attached to this statement for the records. We are therefore pleased to know that from our efforts of representation, the response from the U.S. OFAC is a positive one. We will, as always, continue to monitor the situation closely and make our best efforts to protect the workers, the environment, and the revenues to Jamaica, while keeping the interests of the community and the country in mind. I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank Ambassador Audrey Marks, the U.S. Embassy here in Kingston, the Russian Embassy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the Attorney General's Chambers, UC Rusal Windalco, the Windalco workers, and the Union of Clerical, Administrative, and Supervisory Employees, UCAS, who represent the workers, as well as the opposition for their assistance and input in getting us to this point. We are of the opinion that the U.S. government is committed to assisting Jamaica with the sanctions which were never intended to harm Jamaica or our economy. We are pleased that the U.S. government is extending their support in finding a solution. We believe in discussion and negotiation, and will continue the engagement to chart a course for that time after October 23, 2018, the expiry date of General License 14. The letter of clarification from the U.S. OFAC on the operations at Windalco is welcome, and we acknowledge that it is not the long-term solution, but a positive step in the right direction. We continue to make our best efforts to ensure that Windalco operations remain open and continue to make their positive contribution to the economy. We will continue to update the House from time to time, Mr. Speaker, if it so pleases you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Paulwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister had shared with me prior to his statement a copy of the letter that has been received, and I thank him for taking me to the confidence, his confidence, and also for the kind words to the union and the opposition who fully supported this move to sensitize the U.S. administration on the importance of this industry and why it was necessary for the reprieve to be granted. And we note, though, that there is still a timeline now to the end of October, and I'm hoping that the efforts will continue in the same way to see if further extensions can be granted. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to, as we are looking at the workers of Windalco, to raise a significant plea on their behalf, as indeed on behalf of the entire country, those of us who have to deal with the daily living. The workers of Windalco are faced today with the highest price of petrol that they have ever witnessed in this country. The price of gasoline is at its highest, even when we were experiencing price per barrel of oil of up to $150. Today it's about 70. But the price of fuel at the pump is now higher than then. What? Yes. And, Mr. Speaker, it's a serious matter because it affects us not only as consumers, but as businesses. And we are going to see the reflection of this in inflation. There are some reasons. Last week when the PAC met, we explored the pricing elements of fuel. And just about 50% of that price is government taxation. 48% taxation, including the hedge that we have been speaking about for some time. And we have called for it, and I'm going to again urge, as we anticipate new increases, because the value of the dollar has been depreciating. And we anticipate that with that will come further increases, that the government seriously contemplates this matter of the hedge and to return those funds to the coffers of the Jamaican people so that at least it can be used to offset the price of electricity. Mr. Speaker, we are also seeing with that also the increase in the price of electricity. We are seeing for the last 2 months increases taking place. Again, this has the effect on those workers at Windalco and across the country who are being burdened by this increase in inflation. Electricity, fuel, these are components that have immediate impact on our standard of living,
Just point
on
of
our
order
cost
there.
of living.
If I may, the honourable member is making a point, but he referred to inflation. And the fact is that inflation for the 12 months ended June 30th was published by Statin as at 2.8%. Inflation measures a basket of goods that covers goods that individuals use throughout their life, right? And so inflation, it should be known, member, is 2.8% for the 12 months ended June 30th, 2018. And in fact, inflation for the first 3 months of this year, for the first quarter of this year, was actually negative. The point of order is that you are inadvertently, I give you that credit, misleading the House to make a relationship between what may be movement in petrol prices and inflation. There may be some contribution, but the two are not the same. I repeat, inflation for the 12 months ended June 30th, as recorded by Statin, is 2.8%. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I should firstly note that the highest price that we have seen for petroleum products occurred in the month of July, not June. Your figures are in relation to the end of June. But, right. And I'm sure it would not have covered that. But the highest prices that we're seeing now occurred in this month of July. It is false to say that it bears nothing on inflation or little, because as we all know, the basket is weighted. But those workers who I'm talking about, those are the ones who, some of whom have to drive to work. They feel it. Their food prices have gone up as a result of the increased transportation. And my own prediction is that what with fuel prices, the value of the exchange being affected, we are going to see much higher levels of inflation than we have seen up to the end of June 2018. And it's just a matter of time for all of this to pass through to the consumers. I am again urging the government that we will look at the cost structure of fuels, and in particular of the hedge money that has been collected on the basis of providing an insurance for the consumers, which insurance is not in place. So if the price of fuel goes, if the price of oil goes to $80 a barrel tomorrow, the Jamaican consumers are not protected. They will have to pay. That will have to be passed through to them in higher prices. Give them back this money for the hedge. Give them back this money. And I can't emphasize enough how important this matter is. The summer is getting very hot, and we really would love for some reprieve to be given to the Jamaican people by this route. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Tweed.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is if he could give us an assessment of the increased levels of foreign exchange that we're going to be able to gain from the, can I call it, the concessions made and announced by him in relation to Windalco. And I asked the question in the context of the figures, I believe recently released by Statin, which indicate very serious balance of trade problems for our economy. Notably, that we're spending in first quarter 2018 about 16% more on fuel than we did last year, 7% more in the importation of food, and 25% more largely for the importation of cars. I'm also creating a context for his answer in noting that of bank credit, only 15% is going to the productive sector, that the average loan rate to businesses is still between 15 and 20%, despite the rate from the BOJ at 2%, and that consumption loans seem to be dominating. In the circumstances, will the Minister appreciate the vital need for improved foreign exchange earnings and tell the House to what extent can we expect an increase from the sources that he has come to tell us of an improvement today?
Mr. Speaker, let me first of all thank the members of the opposition for their input, but especially thank the spokesman on mining for his charity and his kind words. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I see a new member from East Kingston and Port Royal ever since he has started to engage in a certain activity. And I welcome his kind words because he recognizes more than others that this is a Jamaican issue and we should all be at one in trying to resolve the issue that is before us. Mr. Speaker, on the matter of revenue, let me assure the House that so far this year, overall, we are running ahead of projection, budgeted projection on revenue. And at the end of the month, when the figures are collated and published, I am sure the House will be updated and the members will be quite pleased as to the way this administration is running the economy of the country. And the waiver, the clarification we have gotten from the U.S. Department of Treasury will also enhance business from Windalco, and they can then move to full production and to employ more workers, which will drive more revenues to the economy. And right, yeah, because yes, Windalco is responsible for 1/4 of our bauxite exports. And we are confident that at the end of the month, when the figures are collated and published, we will all be very pleased. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the House that our best efforts will be continued so that post-October 23, we will still have the necessary waivers in place and production can move full speed ahead. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Minister Paper number 73, an annual report of the Financial Services Limited for the year ended 2017. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Anti-Doping Commission, JADCO, for the period 2011 through 2015. The National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018 under the National Minimum Wage Act and the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 28 Resolution under the Minimum Wage Act. The Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018 Resolution under the Minimum Wage Act.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following two motions. The National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018 Resolution. And it reads, whereas by virtue of Section 3 of the Minimum Wage Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may, by order published in the Gazette, fix minimum wage of wages for any occupation in the island, either generally or in any specified area, place, or district, in any case in which he is satisfied that the wages being paid to any persons employed in any such occupation are unreasonably low, and may, if he is satisfied that it is desirable so to do, fix a national minimum wage applicable, subject to the provisions of this section, to occupations generally. And whereas, pursuant to the subsection 3 of section 3 of the Act, the Minister may, by order, vary or cancel a minimum wage. And whereas, on the 20th day of July 2018, the Minister made the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018. And whereas, it is provided by Section 5 of the said Section 3 that an order made under that section in relation to a national minimum wage shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And whereas it is desirable that the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018 should be affirmed by resolution, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. That the resolution may be cited as the National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018 resolution, and 2. The National Minimum Wage Amendment Order 2018, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of July 2018, is hereby affirmed. The Minimum Wage Act for Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018 resolution. Whereas, by virtue of Section 3 of the Minimum Wage Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may, by order published in the Gazette, fix minimum rates of wages for any occupation in the island, either generally or in any specified area, place, or district, in any case in which he is satisfied that the wages being paid to any persons employed in any such occupation are unreasonably low, and may, if he is satisfied that it is desirable so to do, fix a national minimum wage applicable, subject to the provisions of this section, to occupations generally. And whereas, pursuant to subsection 3 of Section 3 of the Act, the Minister may by order vary or cancel a minimum wage. And whereas it is provided by subsection 5 of Section 3 of the Act that an order made under that section in relation to a national minimum wage shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And whereas on the 20th day of July 2018, the Minister made the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018, and whereas it is desirable that the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018 be affirmed by resolution, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order 2018. 2. The Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Amendment Order, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of July 2018, is hereby affirmed. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat other than my own? Nothing? Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Private members' motion for the legalization and liberalization of regulatory policies of cannabis in Jamaica. Whereas the use of cannabis for medicinal and recreational purposes has been widespread in Jamaica for decades, despite being illegal for more than 100 years. And whereas this situation has led to the prosecution and discrimination of members of the Rastafarian faith and has caused untold cruelty, injustice, and economic deprivation of many of our citizens. And whereas the present construct of the regulated cannabis industry in Jamaica has left Rastafarians, small and indigenous ganja cultivators and herbalists behind and often completely out of the industry, be it resolved that this Parliament, through amended legislation and accompanying regulations, seek to create a more open and accessible regulated cannabis industry for both consumers and producers, looking at the Canadian experience as a possible model, give more tangible support for public education, speaking to the established medicinal benefits of the cannabis plant, as well as the use and abuse of cannabis, support the prohibition of recreational use for minors, discourage recreational use in adults below the age of 21, allow Rastafarians to monetize their sacramental use of cannabis, provide a moratorium and support for small and traditional ganja farmers to become meaningfully involved in the regulated cannabis industry, and establish a cannabis industry council with meaningful representation from members of the Rastafarian community. And be it further resolved that the name of the Dangerous Drug Amendment Act of 2015 be changed to the Jamaica Cannabis Development Act.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Minister Samudo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? As have it. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me first to thank my colleagues on both sides of the House for accommodating me today. This is an endorsement of how we can work together as one for the good of the country and indeed for the poor and vulnerable. So I thank you both sides, colleagues. On June 26, during my sectoral presentation, I announced in this Honourable House that the minimum wage would be increased during this fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, I now introduce the requisite orders in the House for an affirmative resolution, and I therefore seize the opportunity this afternoon to introduce the National Minimum Wage Order 2018 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 2018 for review and consideration by this Honourable House. The Minimum Wage Act is one of the most important pieces of labour legislation in this country, and it can be contended that Parliament, in its wisdom, recognised that the protection of our workers is critical to the advancement of society. Further, it is a duty of any government to ensure that our workers are not placed in a position where their earning is below a certain level. Hence, Mr. Speaker, in 1938, the Minimum Wage Act was enacted. The Minister of Labour is guided by the provisions of the Minimum Wage Act in determining a minimum wage. Section 3 of the Act is specific in the authority vested in the Minister, as by virtue of ministerial orders, the Minister can set a minimum wage for any occupation in the island in which wages being paid are unreasonably low. It must be noted, however, Mr. Speaker, that the setting of the minimum wage by the Minister is just a guideline to ensure that these low-income earners are not paid below a minimum standard. However, the legislation does not preclude employers from paying sums which are in excess of the minimum wage specified by Parliament. Mr. Speaker, over the years, several orders have been introduced by virtue of the powers vested under Section 3 of the Act. Currently, the National Minimum Wage Order 1975 is used to set a wage for all sectors, including domestic workers, and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 1982 is used to fix a minimum wage for persons employed as security guards to companies who provide security services. The Minimum Wage Act stipulates that a consultative approach be utilized whenever adjustments to the minimum wage are being contemplated. Additionally, Section 4 of the Act dictates that a minimum wage advisory commission be instituted. This body, Mr. Speaker, plays a critical role in providing or guiding the Minister of Labour on all issues germane to the minimum wage. This commission is empowered to have consultations with key stakeholders, review all minimum wages fixed by ministers, and to make its recommendation to the minister as to the fixing of a minimum wage. In 2017, the Commission held regional consultations with various interest groups representing the 14 parishes of Jamaica. Public consultations were also held in the parishes of St. James, Portland, Manchester, St. Anne, and Kingston again. The Commission also heard oral presentations and received written submissions from key stakeholders, which included the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Jamaica Employers Federation, the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Jamaica Household Workers Association, the Jamaica Gasoline Retailers Association, the Bureau of Women's Affairs, the Tambourine Army, and We Change Jamaica, and the Society for Industrial Security Guards. And Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to thank Mr. Castro and the rest of the team who went through the island relentlessly to make sure that the consultations were held. So I would like to use this opportunity to also commend the Commission and the relevant staff within the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for the outstanding work done in completing this review. The great diligence that was exercised in carrying out their mandate has enabled us to make an informed decision in respect of the adjustments to be made to the national minimum wage and the minimum wage for industrial security guards. In recommending a minimum wage, the Commission took into consideration factors such as the current state of the Jamaican economy, the employer's ability to pay, the increased costs of utilities and transportation, the 2016 and 2017 inflation rates, and the government's economic recovery program and its current agreement with the International Monetary Fund. As a minister with a portfolio responsibility for labour, I have to balance the interests of employers and minimum wage earners. I also have to consider the needs of the workers and the ability of employers to pay. Additionally, it is my duty as minister to make every effort to protect employment opportunities for low-income earners. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that the employers for minimum wage earners are not just large corporations. Indeed, the employer of a minimum wage earner can be a public or private sector employee who is also struggling financially. Nevertheless, I also acknowledge that many minimum wage earners are also struggling financially. This is a balancing act that I am compelled to perform as a Minister of Labour in determining the wages to be paid to these workers. Today, Mr. Speaker, I hereby ask this Honourable House to affirm the following increases as approved by Cabinet. The proposed increases, Mr. Speaker, are to become effective on August 1st, 2018. 1. National minimum wage to be increased from $6,200 per 40-hour week to $155 per hour to $7,000 per 40-hour work week, or $175 per hour. 2. The minimum wage for industrial security guards to be increased from $8,854 per 40-hour work week, or $221.35 per hour, to $242.50 per hour, or $9,700 per 40-hour work week. 3. Laundry allowance for industrial security guards to be increased from $40.30 per hour to $44 per hour. Firearm premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $44.30 per hour to $48 per hour. Dog handlers premium allowance payable to industrial security guards to be increased from $29.80 per hour to $33 per hour. Life insurance coverage, Mr. Speaker, forms part of the package for security guards. Certainly, every member of this House would agree with me that they do play a critical role and that oftentimes their lives are at risk. Any responsible government would take steps to ensure that provisions are in place to give them a sense of comfort when carrying out their duties, knowing that, should the unforeseen happen, then life insurance coverage is available. Based on the foregoing, it has been decided, Mr. Speaker, that life insurance coverage payable to security guards who are killed or injured in the line of duty be increased from $2.5 million double indemnity to $2.75 million double indemnity. I close, Mr. Speaker, with a special plea to employers. I say to employers that they must remember that the minimum wage is just a guide which sets out a minimum standard. I therefore implore all employers with the financial means to do so to pay their employers wages in excess of the minimum wage. I urge these employers to bear in mind the sufferings of their employees who are also faced with a high standard of living. Mr. Speaker, I now seek the affirmative resolution of this Honourable House in relation to the National Minimum Wage Order 2018 and the Minimum Wage Industrial Security Guards Order 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Daly.
Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give the response of the opposition to the national minimum wage and for the national minimum wage for security guards. And in a way, I feel a little concerned for the minister, but I won't be very hard on you. I know you have a very good heart. I've known you from before you entered politics. I know you really mean well, but something is wrong. Something is wrong. On the 26th of June, after postponing her speech for about 2 times, the minister came and made her presentation and announced the minimum wage. At the time, the opposition indicated that we believe it was a disgrace. The increase, I said so. It was a disgrace, for after 2 years, it was just $800. We noted also that the other areas of increase to the security guards were announced not in the House, but through some release from the ministry, like dog handlers, fee, firearm fee, etc., etc., etc. The House recessed last week, and most of us, if not all, were busy preparing for a summer program in our constituencies, working hard. Today, for example, I had to open my water in James Hill, which I have to postpone. Yeah? To be here as a very cooperative opposition. And because this deals with the people. Last week we came to deal with the extension for the SOE. And we have come back, we have been called back by the House Leader to say we have to pass the minimum wage because we forget to pass it. Now, after 4 weeks of the presentation, we recess, and you're telling me that 1 page of an order from the 24th of June, colleagues, 1 page to be drafted by the CPC. The chairman of LegCom would have drafted this in half an hour. The legal department in the Ministry of Labour our chairman could do it in 5 seconds. could have drafted this order for 4 weeks, could not, since you spoke, today is exactly 4 weeks, could not find it possible to draft a minimum wage order so we could have taken it last week or the week before. This is for the workers and the poorest of the poorest, those at the bottom of the economic ladder. These two activities are for them. Mr. Speaker, I don't really know how to describe this because we are a very cooperative opposition. I don't know if I'm to say it is incompetence. I don't know if I'm to say it is lack of genuine care for the workers. I don't know if I'm to say it is ineptitude, or I don't know if I'm to say it's just a chaka-chaka government, or all of the above. I'm not blaming civil servant. This order could have been drafted the day after the minister spoke. And if you're telling me that the Attorney General's chamber and all the people who work there and at CPC could not draft this one page since the minister spoke on the 24th, something is really wrong. But we are a very cooperative opposition, and we came back to do what we have to do for the people. The opposition still believes that the increase is very small and meaningless, and I will prove it. And I believe, I'm going to read for you, Mr. Speaker, something that was said in this House on the 28th of January 2018, 1 month before the elections in 2016, 28th of January 2016, by one of the best I know since I've been in public life. One of the best. A week after the House of Representatives voted to move the minimum wage to $6,200 per week, a long-standing member of the Parliament turned up in the legislature this week, suggested that the minimum wage be pegged to the US dollars. Audley Shaw, the man who shadowed the finance portfolio for the parliamentary opposition, said Jamaica move the minimum wage as soon as possible to $5,000 US annually. However, the calm and conscious head, Dr. Peter Phillips, the Minister of Finance, said while the Parliament may want to consider the proposal, warned that it could lead to significant job losses among low-income earners. If Mr. Shaw's suggestion for a $5,000 US per annum minimum wage is entertained, it would mean many workers would have been out of job. The minister said, we have to be careful. An instantaneous movement in the minimum wage in the direction suggested by Mr. Shaw would have the effect immediately of putting many people out of work because their business would not be able to sustain them at that time. That is what the Minister of Finance, the cool, calm, calculated head, said at the time. These words, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the best I've ever seen anywhere in Jamaica. Honorable Audley Shaw, Manayard, pass it to him for me. These are his words. 5,000 US per annum it must move to. The member from Southwest St. Andrew asked the question, where is that man now? What is it? $800 after 2 years. South St. Andrew. $800 after 2 years. And I tell you what the $800 in effect what it is. It's about $192 that is not even sufficient for a bus ride around Kmart. It is not sufficient for the worker, the ordinary worker. This is the household helper. This is the mechanic who has to go to the mechanic shop. These are the people who do day's work. It is not enough, and I said so then, and the opposition still says so now, that the people of Jamaica, the working class of this country, the poor people, Minister, can get more. The economy, Minister of Finance, the economy can sustain a higher minimum wage at this time. And I'm saying you must move it to 10,000 immediately. But it can sustain more than the 7,000 that has been offered. $800 after 2 years. Mr. Speaker, it is what it is. Some workers would have, some employers would have given the increase, even if we had totally forgotten to come and approve the motion. Because there are some very, very conscious employers in Jamaica who actually pay more than the minimum wage. And as we always say, the minimum wage is a guide. Nobody is to be paid less than the 7,000 per annum. Some people have paid more. Many people pay their household helper much more than that. Many small companies and large companies pay more than that. But we must set the example. I believe, we believe on this side, that the minimum wage can go beyond the 7,000 per week at this time in the Jamaican economy. And I reiterate the position of the People's National Party, Her Majesty, loyal opposition. We will return one day, and if it is God's will and we are returned to government, we are going to raise the minimum wage every January 1 until the ordinary worker reaches a certain level. Because we did it before. We did it before to take the worker up to a level. Take them up to a level. We did it for 4 years. And it can happen. There are workers in Jamaica who are suffering. There are workers, the $192 in effect cannot buy a patty and a cocoa bread. It cannot buy a patty and a cocoa bread. What is disingenuous? $800 is nothing after 2 years. The real effect, when you look at inflation in 2016 and 2017, the real effect in dollar terms is $192 per week that the worker is going to have. But, Mr. Speaker, we have come to give the minister the support to pass the minimum wage. And we appeal to you. Raise it next year again. The Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister, show that you care. Raise it above inflation. If inflation turns out to be 4%, put it at 5%. Inflation plus 1 or inflation plus 2. So these ordinary poor workers are a little bit above inflation, and we'll keep moving them up. Mr. Speaker, we firmly believe in what we say, and what we say is what we intend to do. We did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. 4 years straight, I did it as Minister of Labour. And we can do it again, and we will do it again. And workers, the time comes to do it again. The time comes to do it again. But I'm saying to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Industry, Agriculture, Fisheries, who understand this thing deeply, I'm saying to you, let's raise it next year again. Let's raise it the following year again. Peg it to inflation for those workers who we have in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, in so doing, but give them each year. But give them each year. The security guards, I must tell you, the amount for firearm, the amount for firearm handling, the amount for firearm handlers is low. The amount for dog handlers is low. It is low, but that is what it is. Mr. Speaker, with these words, I say the opposition supports the order, and we hope that the Minister and the Ministry of Finance will take the words of the opposition, look at inflation, and give the order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard what my member opposite said, but I wish that he would, when he speaks on behalf of the people of Jamaica, that he would separate the politics from what is at hand. It is not a political debate. It is a debate that affects all the people of this country. So, to get up and pontificate and speak from a political perspective is not just unfair.
Minister, use a mic that the Hansard indicated they cannot hear you. They cannot hear you.
They are hearing. They are hearing.
Speak in the mic.
While I hear what he has said, and some of the advice we can look at, some of them just don't make sense.
Order, please.
We thank, and Mr. Speaker, for him to get up and to lambast us for coming back here today. We are elected to come to Parliament. This is where we do the people's business. So whether we... And I apologized before, and I thank the members for their cooperation. So a lot of what the members said, rather than focusing and even acknowledging that the head of the Household Helpers Association came out publicly and said that they were pleased with the increase, Mr. Speaker, is being disingenuous. So, Mr. Speaker, having heard what he has said and having said a few words that I have to say, I ask that the debate be closed and that the motion be approved.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to...
Order, please.
It is not intended to do any further business today, so I invite you to adjourn this honourable House for a date to be fixed.
The motion is that the House be adjourned to a date to be fixed. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. This honourable House stands adjourned.